This video, taken on the 11th of October 2015, shows the moments before an evil murdering psychopath decides to take the life of an innocent man, whose only crime had been to look at him across a crowded room. Just moments after this footage was taken, this evil-hearted and barbaric man would kill his victim in cold blood and then disappear completely, resulting in a manhunt across Europe that would span almost 4 years and see Shane O'Brien become the UK's most wanted murderer. This is the unbelievable story of Shane O'Brien, a callous and cold-blooded killer whose links to organised crime bosses helped him get away with murder for 3.5 years. And in this video, we discuss the murder, the escape and evasion, and the eventual capture of this monster of a man. Hello and welcome to the Diary of Madmen and Monsters, where we talk about the mad men, women and monsters that inhabit our society, covering well-known and not so well-known cases across the UK and beyond. And if your life mantra is sleep, eat, true crime, repeat, then you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. Now, let's get ready because it's time for more true crime. On the afternoon of the 10th of October 2015, Josh Hansen, a 21-year-old planner for Stanmore Quality Servicing, had rushed to the hospital to support his girlfriend after her father had suffered a suspected heart attack. Later that evening, after making sure the family member was okay, Josh and his partner had decided to meet up with his cousin and a small group of friends to have a night out in the pubs and clubs of Eastcote, West London, not realising that this night would be the last night of Joshua's young life. Josh, who was born on Sunday 27th of February 1994 at Central Middlesex Hospital, was described by his family as a considerate, kind and generous man, and someone who was full of life with a gentle and kind approach to others. They said his zest for life would rub off on everyone, and that you needed a lot of energy to keep up with him, as he wanted to live every second of his life to the fullest. Sometime during the night, Josh and his group decided to enter the RE bar, and inside the venue, Josh is seen on CCTV having a great time and conversing with his friends. Around an hour later, Shane O'Brien and 3 other men arrive and take up a spot just meters away, where Shane O'Brien can be seen on CCTV sitting at a table with his friends, dancing, laughing and seemingly having a good time. At around 1 PM, after only having been in the bar for a short period, Shane finishes his drink, puts on his green Canada Goose jacket and gets up ready to leave. However, before doing so, he decides that he wants to make a statement. He wants to get some payback for the disrespect he feels he has been shown. And so, before leaving, he approaches Josh and confronts him about the fact that while Shane and his friends were sitting on their seats, Josh had looked at him from across the other side of the bar. Walking up to Josh, who was just 5'6" compared to Shane, who stood at 6 foot tall, he glares at him and snaps, "What's your problem?" pushing his face close towards Josh, who, on camera, can be seen looking shocked by Shane's approach. As the pair stand there, locked in a momentary head-to-head, Shane reaches into his pocket and sneakily takes hold of a deadly weapon in the form of a craft knife, removing it from his pocket and sliding it down and behind his leg as he continues to goad Josh. As he does so, he presses down on the mechanism that allows the blade to protrude from the top of the knife, readying it to be used with deadly force. Suddenly, and without warning, Shane brings the blade up above Josh's head, bringing it down onto his face, just above his ear. As he drags the knife down across Josh's body, the knife leaves a gash of 37 centimeters that creates a massive open wound from his ear down his cheek into his neck and onto his chest, with Josh then stumbling back and reaching for his neck in a panic as he sees the blood spurting out of his body and realizes what it is that Shane has just done. Shane, however, simply turns away from his victim, retracts the knife, placing it back inside of his blood-soaked jacket pocket and walks out of the bar calmly, with no care at all about the injuries he had just inflicted upon Josh, leaving him to suffer, surrounded by his shocked and traumatized friends. Once outside, Shane, without seeming concerned at all about what had just occurred, walks across the road and gets into his friend's white van, making his getaway from the scene. Back in the bar, Josh had fallen to the pub floor and was fighting for his life as his lifeblood spilled from his body into a puddle around him, with friends and onlookers watching on in fear as he began to slip away. Those around him, one a trained nurse, tried in vain to stem the flow of blood and performed CPR on Josh while they waited for emergency services to arrive. The emergency services did arrive quickly, but despite the expert medical care and their heroic attempts to save him, Josh passed away from his wounds there on the floor of the RE bar that night, in front of his devastated girlfriend, cousin and friends, with a post-mortem later revealing that he died as a result of a major hemorrhage, inhalation of blood and an incised wound to the neck. After Joshua's death, the police launched a full-scale investigation into the harrowing attack, isolating the scene and quickly commandeering CCTV from the venue for fear that it might be deleted. Immediately, they identified the man who had murdered Josh in cold blood that night as Shane O'Brien, confirming it was him via fingerprints he left on the glasses he can be seen drinking from on CCTV footage. And upon confirming it was him, it was then that the manhunt began. Shane, who at around lunchtime the next day made his way from London to Camber Sands Holiday Park in East Sussex, had by this time heard that Josh had died from his attack the previous night and had begun to formulate a plan to evade capture. Utilising his many connections to the dark and seedy depths of the underworld, he quickly began to put into action the cunning ploy that would see him stay one step ahead of the police for years to come. Leaning on his vast network of associates, he quickly organised a private jet through a contact known only as Vanessa to fly him out of the UK from Biggin Hill Airport across Europe and to what he believed would be the safety of foreign shores. But not before he and his friend had a little bit of time to visit local pubs and shopping centres across the next few days and nights, with Shane and said friend seen entering a local pub at around 7 p.m. on Sunday the 11th, as well as returning the next night for more drinks, where they also struck up a conversation with the bar staff, with Shane informing them that he owned a caravan at Camber Sands caravan site just along the road. After leaving, they also made their way to an Indian restaurant, with CCTV showing O'Brien looking cool, calm and collected as he enjoyed his evening out, giving away no signs at all that he had just days earlier murdered a man in cold blood. The next day, on Tuesday, October 13th, Shane and a friend travelled to Ashford Designer Outlet in a VW Golf, where they visited multiple designer shops, picked out clothing, as well as picking out a suitcase, before travelling back to Camber Sands Holiday Park. At the same time, whilst Shane was calmly going about his day, seemingly without a care in the world, the police in West London were piecing together the details of the case, putting out appeals across the news and social media sites, and profiling Shane himself, trying to figure out exactly who this evil and dangerous man who could coldly murder a man in public and then vanish into thin air without a care in the world really was. As they did, they were also applying for warrants to search any known locations that Shane had been associated with, focusing on two locations specifically in the Ruislip and Ladbroke Grove areas of London. In these properties, they found multiple knives, machetes and a hatchet that were connected to Shane himself. During their appeals, police had flooded Facebook with posts trying to reach anyone who might have information on the whereabouts of Shane O'Brien, with the police even offering £10,000 for any information that led to the capture and arrest of Shane. Multiple possible sightings came in from the appeals, but one in particular stood out, as one of the bar staff in the pub that Shane had visited on the nights of the 11th and 12th of October had recognised the man in said appeal and informed the police on Wednesday, October the 14th, that they had seen Shane in the pub and that he had spoken with staff, informing them that he owned a caravan in the Camber Sands caravan park nearby. The police then made their way to said caravan park and searched the caravan in question. But, unfortunately, Shane had already made his getaway, catching his pre-arranged flight and leaving the UK at 3 p.m. on Wednesday the 14th of October. Police, who knew they were just hours behind O'Brien, traced his movements across the previous days and discovered that Shane had boarded a private jet and left the country, with the investigation into his whereabouts confirming that the plane had been destined for the southeast Netherlands, near the Belgium and German borders. At this point, the police expanded their search for O'Brien internationally, obtaining a European arrest warrant and bringing in the help of Interpol, Europol and the National Crime Agency, as well as placing O'Brien at the top of the UK's most wanted list. The police also increased the reward for information leading to the prosecution of O'Brien from £10,000 to £50,000. As the investigation into the disappearance of O'Brien continued, it was found that the private jet that Shane had left the UK on had landed on a small airfield in the Netherlands, where it was reported that due to having no passport, Shane was refused entry to the country, with the plane then simply taking off again and continuing on to Germany, where it was found that instead of going through the port of entry into the country, Shane simply walked off the plane, walked across the airfield and vanished once more into thin air. At this point, the police were beginning to uncover the sheer depth of criminality that Shane was involved in, chartering private flights, landing at airports only to take off moments later and fly to different locations isn't easy for most people to do, especially not criminals at the lower end of the criminal fraternity. So the fact that he could do so easily truly signified just how deep his criminal roots were implanted, and as the story unfurled further, they would find out just how far said criminal associates were willing to go to help Shane O'Brien evade capture. As the police continued to expand their search across the globe, they regularly appealed for any and all information regarding his whereabouts, with sightings being reported as far as Spain, Thailand and Dubai, and any and all information was investigated. But the trail began to grow cold as the years stretched on, with Shane evading capture for longer and longer due to the aid of his underworld friends. As the police waited for the cracks in Shane's plans to appear, Shane, using aliases and fake documents, travelled across Europe, bedding women, training in martial arts gyms, and visiting nightclubs across every country and city he would attend, being funded by his lucrative connections and using the houses and apartments they would offer him. Shane's deep-rooted ties with the drug trade meant he had access to a myriad of resources that the common criminal simply does not have, allowing him to evade capture for an extended period, frustrating the police and Josh's family, who were desperate to see Shane brought to justice for his heinous crime. After 3 long years had passed and upon renewed appeals, with Josh's family even pushing their own appeals across the national news agencies and social media alongside police efforts, the sightings were coming in thick and fast, with multiple even coming in locations in London and across the UK, but proving to be cases of mistaken identity, with Shane's brother often being mistaken as Shane himself whilst out and about. In February 2017, however, it seemed the net had begun to close in around him, when reports came through that Shane O'Brien had been arrested after a nightclub bust-up in Prague. Police in the city had detained O'Brien after a fight, taken fingerprints and recorded his appearance, taking photographs of him showing that he had made great efforts to change his look completely, having grown out his hair and beard and covered over old distinctive tattoos with new designs. Unfortunately, however, the police in Prague had not immediately placed his fingerprints into the European database after Shane had identified himself as one of his aliases, Enzo Melancelli. Instead, they waited to do so until after Shane had been released on bail, and upon his release, he immediately left the country, making his way to Romania. Once his fingerprints were entered into the European database, police in the UK were notified of his arrest and were now once again hot on his tail. Realising that Shane had spent a considerable amount of time in Prague, they managed to track down gyms that he had trained at, barbers that had trimmed his hair, and even the tattoo artist that covered over his old tattoos, who claimed that Shane had cried like a baby whilst having his new tattoos done, and that he had asked for the tattoos to be completed as quickly as possible across 3 days, as he might not be in the city for long. In May 2018, police scaled up their efforts to find O'Brien, and Interpol issued a red notice, which sends alerts to police forces worldwide, elevating O'Brien from the UK's most wanted man to one of the world's most wanted criminals. During their investigation, the police dove deep into the psyche of the man they were searching for, trying to figure out what could motivate the son of a postman and the father of 2 young children to kill. What was it that drove him to take the steps he took that night? With the conclusion being that it simply came down to the fact that it was a random attack, and that Shane had simply set out that night with the knife in his pocket, with the intent that he might just use it should the opportunity arise. And unfortunately for Josh Hansen, Shane used the altercation between the pair as his opportunity to do so. The police speculated that Shane was being aided by family members and criminal associates, with police uncovering the fact that his cousin, Jason Manners, was jailed for 14 years for his role in a £10 million cocaine ring, as well as a friend of his known as Jason Peel also being jailed for 16 years for smuggling and from Holland to the UK, with police being informed that both Manners and Peel had grown up on the Sutton Way estate, the very same estate that O'Brien had grown up on himself. On Thursday, March 21st, 2019, DCI Noel McHugh of the National Crime Agency was contacted by Shane O'Brien's solicitor, expressing that Shane wanted to hand himself in, but only if he would travel to Budapest himself to meet him and arrest him on the scene. Apprehensive about the situation, believing this could simply be a trick to waste more police time, McHugh agreed, but upon doing so, was then told that the meeting point had changed. Shane had now expressed his wish to be arrested in Romania instead, tipping UK police off to his potential whereabouts, causing them to inform Romanian police to ensure they made concerted efforts to look out for him as they patrolled the streets. And this would prove to be the ultimate downfall of Shane O'Brien, because on the 23rd of March 2019, whilst he was out in the city centre, the Romanian police force recognised him from the photos that had been circulated and moved in to arrest him, capturing him on a busy street in the city of Cluj-Napoca, and finally bringing an end to the cat and mouse madness. Upon his arrest, he was found to have in his possession 3 mobile phones, a false Danish passport under the name Oliver Jacobson, and a Capital One credit card in the name of Jake Tyler. It was also found that O'Brien had used a Canadian driving licence under the name Jeff Williams, a false American Express card, and an Australian driving licence. On the day of his arrest, the police informed Josh's family that the killer of their beloved son and brother had finally been caught, and the relief was immediately apparent, with Josh's mum posting on Twitter, "Today, on the 23rd of March 2019, and after 3.5 years of waiting, today is Josh's day." The arrest now meant the family could focus on beginning to grieve for the death of Joshua, rather than focusing on the hunt for his killer. After being held by Romanian forces, Shane was handed over to British police and brought back to the UK on April 5th, 2019, where he would stand trial for his crimes in September of 2019. During his trial, O'Brien pleaded not guilty to the murder of Joshua Hanson, stating that he accepts that his actions led to the death of Josh, but that due to the fact that he had not intended to actually connect with the knife and had instead intended to simply scare him, he was not criminally responsible for the murder. O'Brien also went on to tell jurors he felt intimidated by Joshua, who he said started being very aggressive by his facial expressions because he and his friends were not happy with us sitting at the table nearby. Continuing, he said he was the instigator of the whole thing. He was raring to go. Personally, I felt like he was ready to attack me. Mr. O'Brien went on to detail how he had only approached Joshua to tell him to leave him alone, saying, "I said something along the lines of, 'What's your problem? Leave me alone,'" adding he was smirking in a sarcastic action. He then told jurors he only wanted to scare Mr. Hanson, telling them, "From the bottom of my heart, I did not mean to touch him with that blade." At the Old Bailey on October 1st, 2019, the trial came to an end with the jury retired to consider their verdict, and after only 55 minutes of deliberation, came back finding the defendant guilty of the murder of Joshua Hanson, to the relief of his family and friends. Subsequently, on October 17th, 2019, Judge Nigel Lickley QC sentenced O'Brien to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years, with O'Brien sitting emotionless and stony-faced as he was told his fate. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Lickley said this was a grotesque, violent and totally unnecessary attack on an innocent man. The reason why you behaved in such a way may never be explained. You, however, know why you did. It is clear from when you looked up at the CCTV camera you had formed the intention to stab Josh Hanson. Josh Hanson was a popular man. He loved life and was loved, and he had his entire life ahead of him. He was generous and supportive. He excelled in his work. Words cannot express the hurt and damage you have caused. You murdered Josh Hanson in front of people who were enjoying their night out. Josh's mother, Tracy Hanson, said after the conviction, "The aftermath of Josh's murder has left us broken beyond repair, as Josh was taken from us in the most horrific way possible, suddenly, abruptly, viciously and violently, and nothing will ever erase the CCTV footage of Josh's final moments from our minds as he was struck with a knife so horrifically and callously, along with his suffering as he tried to fight for his life." In a victim impact statement, she described her son as being considerate, kind and generous, and on a website set up to honour the memory of Josh and raise awareness about knife crime and the effects of violent crime in schools, colleges and universities, Tracy described how his zest for life would rub off on everyone, although you needed a lot of energy to keep up with him, as he wanted to live every second of his life to the full. And that brings me on to the next video. If you took something from this video, you might also find the video on screen now interesting, where I delve into the UK's most evil predators in 2025, highlighting two evil and despicable men who were jailed for the crime of in 2025. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, when it will once again be time for more true crime.